Hey there, honeys. Welcome back to a brand new week of Beesness updates for you, featuring all the buzz of the art world from June 8th through the 14th. Little Father's Day shout out here for all the dads who have earned that title, especially my own. And now we begin. Only one follow-up for you today. 2 more men were sentenced in England for stealing Maurizio Catalan's golden toilet. According to a release from the Crown Prosecution Service, a judge sentenced 2 men who took part in the 2019 raid of the 18-karat gold toilet occurring at Blenheim Palace. James Sheen was convicted of the theft and received a 4-year prison sentence, while Michael Jones, who staked out the palace, received a 27-month prison sentence. Said Shan Saunders for the service in official statements, the thieves left unusual amounts of digital and physical evidence behind for the level of planning they must have done to steal the toilet in under 5 minutes. Saunders added, quote, 3 of the individuals involved in this crime have now been sentenced, and we believe this prosecution has played a part in disrupting a wider crime and money laundering network, end quote. Moving right along to a sort of different but definitely worthy headline from the last week, the closure of an Indian craft shop has left the future and legacy of it uncertain. The shop in question closed on June 6th, was named the Indian Craft Shop, and presented the handmade arts and crafts of federally recognized American Indians in the main hallway of the massive Stuart Lee Udall Department of the Interior building for 87 years. The shop also had an educational mission informed by the Indian Arts and Crafts Board, itself established by Congress in 1935 to promote Native American and Alaskan Native arts through economic enterprises. The now former operating company of the store chose not to continue operations after director of the shop, employee of 42 years, and the shop's sole employee since the COVID-19 pandemic, Susan Purain, decided to retire this year. Michael Rooston, director of the Interior Department's Office of Facilities and Administrative Services, confirmed the department is working to identify a new operator with forthcoming requests for tribally owned entities to bid, and don't plan to change the terms and conditions of operating the store for future contracts. The shop is notable as our sources wrote, quote, high-ranking government officials have long purchased the shop's merchandise for visiting dignitaries, and it has been acquired for museum collections, end quote, as well. The shop has been recognized for allowing a wider range of work styles and contemporary pieces to reach the public eye and market than some other, quote-unquote, traditionally minded venues, and Choctaw artist George Shukata Willis, whose work has been presented in the shop since the 1990s, said to our sources, quote, Purain prioritized the artists and made them feel important, end quote. We hope this piece of history will continue to live in the present via a new operator. Last week also saw the Donald Judd Foundation in Marfa listed on the National Register. The Texas Historical Commission, a group that oversees preserved sites in the state, made the announcement of the newly designated district as an amendment to the Fort D.A. Russell Historic District listed in 2006. The new listing changed to reflect Judd's name in recognition of the minimal artist contributions to the site's art and architectural rehabbing done between 1973 until his death in 1994, comprises 15 buildings and a single monumental artwork. Said Joseph Bell, executive director of the Texas Historical Commission, quote, listing the Donald Judd Historic District in the National Register of Historic Places gives this special place the nationwide recognition it deserves. Judd's legacy and cultural impact on Presidio County's heritage are well worth preserving for future generations, end quote. Brooklyn's Grand Army Plaza Arch also reopened after an $8.9 million U.S. restoration last week. The 2-year-long makeover was funded by former Mayor Bill de Blasio's administration, and the 80-foot-tall Soldiers and Sailors Memorial Arch was designed by John H. Duncan as a commemoration of Union Army forces that fell in the Civil War, built between 1889 and 1892. This work included using laboratory testing to trace the existing stonework mortar back to a quarry in Rosendale, New York, and replace it with matching stone from a separate quarry, as well as the disassembly, cleaning, and reassembly of its cast iron staircases. Though its restorations were originally expected to wrap up in fall of 2023, one of the involved organization's Director of Architecture and Preservation, David Yum, told sources that the restoration team uncovered dozens of unforeseen challenges during the project. The ribbon-cutting ceremony for the public reopening last week was hosted by the New York City Department of Parks and the Prospect Park Alliance, which oversaw the refurbishment of the Beaux Arts landmark. Also last week, the Met announced a new artisan residency program with the highly esteemed Swiss luxury watch and clock manufacturer Vacheron Constantin. During the 18 months of the program, artisans will engage not only with the Met's New York collections, but also Vacheron Constantin's master artisans in Geneva, Switzerland. The program will culminate in an artisan show at the Met in October of 2026, meant to, quote, highlight the innovative intersections between historic craftsmanship and contemporary artistry, end quote. The 3 artists chosen for the first iteration of this program are furniture maker Aspen Golan from the USA, ceramicist Ibrahim Syed from Egypt, and jeweler Joy Harvey of Italy. We additionally heard that Simon Wallace has been named Secretary and CEO of the Royal Academy of Arts. He is currently the director of the Hepworth Wakefield in Yorkshire, England, and will fill the role vacated by Alex Ruger, who is now director of the Frick Collection in New York. Wallace arrives as the Royal Academy continues to struggle to regain its post-pandemic footing, having slashed its workforce by 15% this past April. We will see what effect his leadership has. We further learned that Frieze will launch a new Seoul exhibition space ahead of its September fair there. The space will be located in Yaksu-dong in central Seoul. It will host exhibitions and events organized by leading galleries during the 4 days of the fair, September 3rd through September 6th. The headline stood out to us because of how much attention Frieze has been giving to Korea lately. Its executive director, Crystal Chade, stated that the Korean city has increasingly become a quote-unquote focal point for collectors and dealers internationally, while the fair's directors have said that expanding the Seoul brand has been a primary post-pandemic goal. The week's headlines also featured news of the death of Gunter Uker, a Zero artist who made abstractions from nails at the age of 95. His passing was announced after the German press agency DPA reported that he'd been hospitalized in Dusseldorf. His representative, the New York gallery Levi Gorvy Dion, did not specify a cause of death. Art News describes Uker as, quote, an iconic artist of the post-war era who redefined abstraction not with paint but with nails hammered into his canvases, end quote. The week featured news of some interesting auctions and sales, one of which was the sale of a life-size bronze rhinoceros desk for $16.4 million US at Sotheby's. The work in question, Grand Rhinoceros II by Francois Xavier Lalande from 2003, is indeed a life-size, gold-patinated, leathered bronze and brass desk made in the shape of the animal. This sculpture, the first edition out of 8, was sold at Sotheby's Important Design Day sale in New York on June 11th. After 45 bids placed online and via phone, it went for higher than its estimates. We noticed the headline because, as Art News put it, quote, the results are further evidence of an ongoing strong demand for works by Francois Xavier and his wife, Claude Lalande, by collectors across the categories of design, fine art, post-war, and contemporary, impressionist, and modern art, end quote. Consider that another Lalande work, Bar à Autres, from 1967 to 68, went for £11.1 million or $12 million US at Sotheby's Paris on May 20th. We also learned of the sale of a so-called copy of a marble Rodin sculpture for $1 million US at auction in France. The work in question is titled Despair from 1892, which was thought to be, then later verified as, an extremely rare and authentic Rodin piece. At one point, the sculpture had gone missing after being sold at auction in 1906, but was eventually found. We're not really sure what happened there. No details were given. But we do know an unrelated months-long investigation into the sculpture's origins by the current owners resulted in the confirmation of its authenticity by the leading authority on the artist, Comite Rodin. Finally, we learned Sotheby's London will sell, quote, the greatest collection of surrealism to emerge in recent history, end quote. The collection in question belonged to British socialite, collector, and arts patron Pauline Karpides, and it includes masterpieces by Magritte, Dali, Leonora Carrington, and Max Ernst, as well as unique pieces of furniture collected over the years. Oliver Barker, Sotheby's Europe chairman, told Art News that Karpides, quote, fits seamlessly into the legacy of Grande Dame collectors and patrons who have come before her, and she will no doubt inspire many for years to come, end quote. The collection will hit the auction block at Sotheby's on September 17th and 18th, and it is expected to fetch £60 million or 81 million US dollars. That is the highest estimate ever placed on a single collection at Sotheby's in Europe. Last week also came with the news that French museums are going to raise their ticket prices for non-EU visitors. According to the publication Le Monde, major French French museums, the Louvre, the Chateau de Versailles, and others will begin charging non-union visitors €30 or about $35, which is up €8 and $10 in their respective currencies, beginning with the first of the year 2026. The new pricing is being described as a quote-unquote differential tariff aimed to fill in the financial gaps left by quote cultural budget cuts, waning corporate sponsorships, and rising restoration costs, end quote. It is inherently limited to non-European visitors because the European Commission rules guarantee equal access to cultural institutions for EU citizens. And these are validated reasons. As we previously reported, the Louvre itself is facing an enormous €400 million or 450 million US in repair needs over the next 15 years. A recently leaked letter from director Laurence Descartes, published by Le Parisien, confirmed that much of the building is no longer watertight and suffers from other conditions which jeopardize the museum's collections. What caught our attention about this story, honeys, is that our sources noted multiple other French museums, historic sites, and top tourist destinations are also soon to test similar pricing changes. These include the Arc de Triomphe and Paris's Opera Garnier. Furthermore, not everyone is on board as, in our sources' words, this new charge marks a change in France's, quote, long-professed commitment to universal access to culture, end quote. For example, we have Valérie Baud, a representative of the CFDT union at the Louvre, criticizing the timing of the price hike and calling it, quote, discriminatory, end quote. She went on to argue, quote, it undermines the core values of France's public cultural service, universality, equality, and openness, end quote, though the nation's culture ministry does not seem to believe the price increase will slow attendance. Additionally, the trust overseeing the Rivera and Kahlo estates was accused of mismanagement. In a statement to the art newspaper, the first to break this headline, Hilda Trujillo Soto, who led the two museums devoted to husband and wife, Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo, in Mexico City between 2009 and 2020, has accused the trust overseeing those two institutions of years of mismanagement. Soto publicly made her allegations in an extensive blog post published in early April that the trustees failed to properly address a discrepancy in their records centering around Kahlo and Rivera works, as well as personal documents of Frida's, which may have gone missing and some of which Soto claims later appeared without explanation in private collections in the U.S. The trust, established in 1955 by Rivera, is now overseen by Mexico's central bank, Banxico. Both museums' collections operate with a protected status under Mexican national heritage law, plus are subject to the terms of that trust's governance. Soto went on to claim that Mexican officials have not responded to her many written and in-person requests for audits of financial and historical records related to the museum's collections since she started making them back in 2020. The trust, for its part, claims that she never officially reported any such concerns about the collection or its status during her tenure. In any case, honeys, this is a serious deal to have the trust standards and also potentially national laws of heritage violated here. If these allegations are true, it may also affect an upcoming major traveling exhibition on Kahlo that the trust is co-organizing with the Museum of Fine Arts Houston and the Tate Modern, not to mention all of the legal consequences that would also happen. But we had a bit of good news to balance that out. The FBI has recovered two paintings stolen 40 years ago from the University of New Mexico's Harwood Museum of Art. The museum unveiled the two canvases to the public on June 6th. They are Victor Higgins's Aspens, circa 1932, and Joseph Henry Sharp's Oklahoma Cheyenne, aka Indian Boy in Full Dress, circa 1915. The FBI press release about the return explains that both were stolen in broad daylight in March of 1985 from the building, which was then primarily a public library presenting art on its second floor. It was much less a museum then. But the search had its first breakthrough in decades when an LA-based crime researcher, Lou Schachter, watched a 2022 documentary by Alison Otto examining the November 1985 theft of Willem de Kooning's 1955 work, Woman Ochre, from Tucson's University of Arizona Museum of Art. The film followed the tracking of it to the New Mexico home of otherwise normal-seeming couple Jerry and Rita Alter, who died in 2012 and 2017, respectively. Schachter spotted the two works on a living room wall and wondered if they were also stolen. He did some digging and notified the Harvard Museum's executive director, Juniper LaHeresy, of the find via email in 2023. She subsequently notified the FBI, which found both had been donated to a thrift store, which had sold them in a 2018 Scottsdale art auction event and got them returned on May 12th of this year. Another notable part about this case case. Even if the two authors were alive today, they likely would not be prosecuted. That's because the theft of the two works occurred 9 years before the theft of major artwork statute, making it a federal offense to steal any object of cultural heritage from a museum or library. That was passed in 1994. Last week also saw Disney, Universal, and others launch an AI legal battle suing Midjourney over claims of copyright infringement. The lawsuit, filed in U.S. District Court in LA on Wednesday against the company, primarily centers on tools that allow its users to recreate images and videos which may mimic and/or manipulate famous characters via a few simple clicks and prompts. The other plaintiffs include notable names like Marvel, Lucasfilm, DreamWorks Animation, and describes the generative AI firm as, quote, a bottomless pit of plagiarism, end quote. A few more details about this complaint: it asserts that AI-generated images of Vader, WALL-E, Stormtroopers, How to Train Your Dragon characters, many more, are evidence of copyright infringement actively perpetuated by Midjourney, and states that the firm is only able to provide such outputs because its tools have already gobbled up copyrighted intellectual property across the web as quote-unquote training data. Most of all, these companies are pissed that Midjourney seems to be flaunting its own disregard for its alleged built-in anti-copyright infringement tools at the same time. Quote, Midjourney's publication and curation of infringing images on the Explore page show that Midjourney knows that its platform regularly reproduces plaintiffs' copyrighted works and that the Explore page is intended to advertise Midjourney's ability to infringe the copyright works, end quote. This lawsuit strategy is notable as a sharp contrast to that of other major media companies which have already made significant deals with AI companies to license their intellectual property to these tools being used by millions. Most of all, this headline is notable because, as Art News puts it, the suit, quote, marks the first major foray from Hollywood against tech giants that are hoping to reorient consumer habits with personalized entertainment and information by vacuuming up data on the internet and spitting it out in the form of chatbot copy or images, end quote. Headlines were also buzzing last week that looted antiquities from Syria are being sold on Facebook Marketplace. Our sources say that thieves are reportedly robbing graves that are more than 2,000 years old in Palmyra, a UNESCO heritage site that was a former ancient Silk Road city populated in the 3rd century BCE, among other cities, and are listing the funerary gold and artifacts they take on the Facebook site. Amr Al-Azam, a professor of Middle East history and anthropology at Shawnee State University in Ohio and the co-director of the Antiquities Trafficking and Heritage Anthropology Research Project, said of the situation, quote, when the former President Bashar al-Assad's regime fell in December, we saw a huge spike on the ground in looting and trafficking. It was a complete breakdown of any constraints that might have existed in the regime periods that controlled looting, end quote. He noted that the organization, which follows trafficked Middle Eastern antiquities in the black market online, saw nearly 1/3 of its total 1,500 Syrian cases take place in December. Both these types of crime, along with poverty rates of about 90%, have put the country's cultural heritage in extreme danger of being lost and destroyed by those looking for a means of income, any income. More than that, honeys, Facebook is not supposed to allow this per its own 2020 ban on sales of historical artifacts on its platforms, but, quote, the policy is not enforced strictly enough to deter looters from risking these transactions among groups ranging from 100 to 900,000 people, end quote. Experts are additionally concerned about the increasing speeds of the sales of trafficked goods, even as the Syrian government has tried to stop thieves by threatening jail sentences of up to 15 years and alternatively offering finder's fees for those who turn in these looted artifacts. We'll keep you updated on the story as it progresses. Following Israel's Friday airstrikes on the Iranian capital's nuclear and military facilities, galleries and museums citywide shut down their doors, perhaps indefinitely. The Israel Museum in Jerusalem and the Tel Aviv Museum of Art in Tehran had both already closed indefinitely, citing national security guidelines, and Iran has retaliated with dozens of missiles launched toward Israeli territory, with the Iranian government calling the strikes on Tehran, quote, a declaration of war, end quote. We were, of course, concerned about this headline because Tehran is home to several internationally renowned cultural sites, including the Iranian National Museum, the world's largest repository of Persian archaeological and medieval visual art history, as well as the Golestan Palace Complex, UNESCO site. It's unclear whether the special legal protections afforded to the latter will actually save it. Also unclear is the path forward for these local institutions and galleries. And finally, honeys, we learned learned that some LA museums were closing their entire buildings or certain galleries in light of the LA protests, even as others stood in solidarity. Citing quote-unquote evolving conditions in downtown LA, the Geffen Contemporary at the Museum of Contemporary Art and the Broad in LA, both located near a set of government buildings at the literal center of the protests, decided to remain closed through last weekend to, quote, prioritize the safety of their staff and visitors, end quote, as protesters against ICE raids were met with the president's deployment of around 4,000 National Guard members and 700 Marines to the city to stifle the immigration-related protests. In case you were wondering, visitors with tickets to the impacted programs at these museums were promised they'd be contacted with options for refunds or rescheduling. There are multiple reasons, as you can imagine, we wanted to cover this headline. First, these museum decisions to close follow a joint statement issued earlier the week before last by 4 LA arts organizations opposing the ICE sweeps and standing in solidarity with impacted immigrants and protesters. At least one of those signees is still publicly supporting the protesters, the Institute of Contemporary Art LA, who stated, quote, art grounds us in our collective human condition, and we believe in its power against the isolating forces that are relentlessly trying to keep us apart and to relinquish our sense of a shared humanity, end quote. Several other smaller arts organizations made statements in solidarity with the immigrants and activists on Monday following the protests as well. These include, but are not limited to, the Japanese American National Museum, the Chinese American Museum, the LA Plaza de Cultura y Artes Grand Performances, the Social and Public Art Resource Center, Project Crenshaw, a public art project unfolding in a historically Black area of South LA, Museum of Latin American Art in Long Beach, and others. Their statement not only specifically opposed the, quote, unjust mass deportations of immigrants and the unconstitutional presence of the military in our city, we fully support the community's right to peacefully assemble and make their voices heard. While there may be individuals whose purpose is to instigate violence and chaos, they are not the majority, and we do not want people to fear coming into downtown Los Angeles where everyone is welcomed, end quote. One organization, Hollywood House Gallery 839, also took things a step further, issuing a direct appeal to LA Mayor Karen Bass on June 10th, asking her to instruct LAPD to, quote, arrest federal agents violating the civil rights of Angelenos, end quote. Yet equally noticeable, honeys, is that big names like LACMA, MoCA, The Hammer, The Getty, The Broad are staying very quiet for now. We also found a tinge of irony to these closures. The Geffen Galleries' shutdown interrupted the ongoing 10-day durational performance on government surveillance titled Prison State by Russian artist and activist in exile Nadia Tolokonikova of the feminist activist group Pussy Riot. The performance recreates the Russian prison cell where she was confined for nearly 2 years. She said to Art News about continuing with the performance, quote, once you said you're going to show up, you can't just leave simply because the National Guard had a whim to occupy the city, so my choice was to stay and continue doing my job as an artist, end quote. Tolokonikova later wrote on Instagram in response to the programming changes, quote, police state is closed by the police state. Every single event I did in Russia was shut down by the cops, and now it's starting to feel a lot like Russia, end quote. Though she did go on to say she supports the demonstrations nationwide against ICE. All right, honeys, I've given you the buzz and now I am bouncing. Be sure to tune in to catch our Bewitching Barkeeps episode dropping Thursday. And until then, you know the drill. Hydrate or dihydrate. Take care of yourselves. We'll be talking soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.